Now, to speak to us about the role of renewables in achieving energy access and progress made in Africa, he is Gauri Singh, Deputy Director General, International Renewable Energy Agency.
You know, it's one thing that we need to understand about energy transition is that it's not energy transition that we're talking about. It's energy transitions, because every country is going to have a very different pathway.
Correct.
While we'll all get to the same end goal, but you know, the starting points are different. And which is why at IRENA, because we have a membership of about 168 countries, with 12 more, you know, on the cusp of joining. So we actually have a good sense coming from countries across the world in terms of where they are in the energy transition and what's the real support that they need. So some countries, before I get into more specifics, I do have to say that at COP26, with this really big political momentum getting built around net zero, completely changed the way economies around the world are thinking about energy. And I think energy transition is now becoming something that every country is interested in moving to. While you might have conversations that are happening at SEforALL, which are more about access and about providing financing to to countries to be able to move ahead with their reaching communities with affordable power. But what we're also seeing in the more developed countries is looking at how they can make the transition away from fossil fuels more rapidly into the renewables space. And these are both conversations that are happening simultaneously. But that doesn't for a minute mean that, together, when you look at it more holistically, it's really looking at how with this huge opportunity of transforming the way we produce and consume energy, how we have this opportunity of building a much more just and a more equitable world where everyone gains.
Right. Let's talk a bit about the just aspect of it, because there are economies that highly depend on the fossil fuels to actually drive their economies, and we're talking about transitioning from that to other alternatives that are much cleaner, much affordable. And it's good that you mentioned that there's no yardstick, one size fits all for this transition process to happen. But in what way or how would you define a just transition process that leaves no one feeling this is unfair, that yes, we have a common end goal, but the process is a bit intimidating for us as economies in developing countries?
No, absolutely, because when you're talking about just transition, then you're not just talking about moving away from coal to renewables. Definitely you're talking about that. But then you're also talking about the way the coal workers will, for example, make the transition so that they participate in the new forms of energy, and there's reskilling, retraining that can be provided to them. And but then when you're also talking about just transition, you're talking about energy access, because you cannot for a moment move to the climate goals that we as a global community have set for ourselves at the Paris Agreement. All countries need to be able to move to the new form, the modern energy, which is going to be largely based on renewables. And I think energy access is equally important, because that's something that will define how the developing countries make this transition happen.
Right. And then what would be the role then of the renewables in achieving this energy access as far as SDG 7 is concerned?
So very interestingly, the nature of renewables is such that it very well aligns with the way we live on the planet. So, you have urban spaces which are much more amiable to getting electrified through a intensive grid network, and that's where the grid can become greener through renewables. But you also have decentralized applications of renewables. So you can be talking about communities that might be far from the urban centers, but still be able to access modern energy through renewables in a more decentralized manner. So that's the kind of flexibility that renewables offers, which really isn't on offer when we look at the large thermal stations that were built in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or the kind of flexibility you might have with gas-powered stations, because you've really built them like more centralized structures feeding into the grid.
Yeah. You know, the process of these transitions also requires a lot, including financing.
Yes.
Talk to us a bit about what the members of IRENA are actually saying when it comes to money, because without that also as a component to achieving this energy access and this just transition, then probably we could be chasing a mirage.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, finance is critical, and it's really the key of being able to make this transition happen. What a lot of member countries are telling us is that there is real and perceived risk for investors to come and invest in many countries where they have in place a policy framework that's supportive of bringing in investments, but still investments are not happening, which means that there needs to be some kind of a catalyst to be able to work with the investors to make sure that they are not just focusing on a few geographies, but are more, they are also in countries that require these investments, but they're not going there. So I think instruments like concessional loans and grants we've anyway seen. These are part of the normal package that you look at when you think financing. But what's also very important is for instruments like risk guarantees, bringing in equity participation into these projects, and to bring in blended finance. These are things that need to now enter the space of climate financing, which according to our analysis at IRENA, we're still seeing a very conservative way of how finance is being looked at by some of the donor countries which have made a commitment for climate finance.